Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's last segment on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you have enjoyed the show thus far, and we are going to conclude with a fantastically exciting segment. A guy who finished top of his position, the first wide receiver we're introducing on the show. It should be a good way to end the show. A guy whose teammate we already talked about a couple segments ago is, of course, the fantasy player profile of CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb is quickly becoming someone to be reckoned with in fantasy. For someone who has had a lot of competition at the wide receiver position in terms of fantasy and who really wasn't a factor until as of late, I'm really intrigued to see if CeeDee Lamb can replicate the numbers that he put up last year. And let's go over them. Throughout his short career, he's already accumulated 754.3 fantasy points, his best season, much like almost everyone on this episode outside of Saquon Barkley, was last year. 268.2 fantasy points for him. Wide receiver 1, of course, in fantasy points per game. Here's a fascinating stat to know that I was looking up. He surpassed 100 receiving yards in 7 of his last 12 games he's played, including one of his breakout performances of last year in Week 17, where he went off for 227 yards. He ranked 4th out of 81 qualified wide receivers in target share, 5th in yards per route run, and 8th in first downs per route run, and he finished as a top 12 PPR player twice before the bye, and was ultimately a career high year for him. Next year as well is looking to be another year where he can maintain that wide receiver 1 status, as he's projected to go for 1,528 yards, 9 touchdowns for 220.9 points. Now, CeeDee Lamb, much like his teammate Dak Prescott, who I talked about earlier, is one of those guys who is faultless. In the regular season, CeeDee Lamb is the picture of consistency. Now, here's the thing about a guy like CeeDee Lamb. In a position group that is very crowded, especially at the top of the rankings, with some guys who I'm going to talk about tomorrow, I think that in order to maintain your fantasy status, you have to be good in at least 2 areas: your targets and your yardage production, because targets ultimately are what's important in a PPR league where wide receivers are even more heavily valued, and yards just produce a lot of fantasy points no matter what in terms of fantasy formats. CeeDee Lamb has that. However, another important factor, maybe a little bit less so than the other ones, is touchdowns. Now, I know it's kind of weird to say that CeeDee Lamb kind of lacks in the touchdown department, but here's the thing. The best part about the Cowboys' offense is that in the red zone, they can be very heavily effective because they can spread you out in a lot of different ways. So you have to worry about not just CeeDee Lamb, but a guy like Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks. And there's no better red zone receiver than CeeDee Lamb. However, you have to kind of play the long game with CeeDee Lamb. Do you want the CeeDee Lamb that puts up huge yardage numbers, a guy who in 7 of his last 12 games has exceeded the 100 receiving yards mark? Or do you want a CeeDee Lamb that gets a lot of touchdowns, a lot of targets in the red zone, and is kind of sacrificing one of the more important aspects of, say, a dynasty league, a superflex league, in terms of points? CeeDee Lamb, the reason he's such a conundrum and such an interesting wide receiver 1 to dissect is that in almost every single facet of his game, he's tested fantastically well over the past year. However, It's which one you guys want to key in on. I think CeeDee Lamb, unlike many other issues surrounding the players I've talked about on this show where it's a team makeup, I think this is how you guys view him. Because CeeDee Lamb, in my mind, I think is a no-brainer. I have nothing but positive things to say about him. I can't think of one true caveat that would really affect a guy like CeeDee Lamb, except for maybe in the red zone. But I think it's how you guys view him. Because let's say you're in a dynasty league. Let's say you're in a good old-fashioned points league or something like that, playing ESPN Fantasy. ESPN Fantasy is kind of the standard. I don't know what you guys play, but let's say you're in that. In ESPN status, CeeDee Lamb would always be around the 20 to 25 point range. Very solid for a wide receiver, especially in, say, an ESPN league. But let's say you're in a PPR league and you're looking for a guy who does get a lot of targets, does get a lot of receptions, but is in an offense that really is so centered around him. I know this kind of doesn't make sense, but if I were someone in a PPR league, I would want a guy who fits into a system. CeeDee Lamb kind of transcends what the Cowboys do. And it kind of leads to this idea of need over value. What do you need in a fantasy receiver that CeeDee Lamb can offer you? What do you value in terms of how you get points from different areas in different leagues that makes you want to pick up CeeDee Lamb? There are so many different divergent routes you can take when you're considering drafting a guy like CeeDee Lamb. Whereas in more, I wouldn't say tenuous wide receiver situations, but in more kind of up in the air situations where you have guys who are in systems that work for them but still need to spread the wealth, so to speak. CeeDee Lamb, you know, is going to be the go-to guy. CeeDee Lamb, you know, is going to be the number one option for the Dallas Cowboys going forward. You know that he won't really have any worries. But if you're looking for a guy who really sets a team in terms of balance, in terms of, say, versatility, CeeDee Lamb might not be the guy. And it feels weird to say because he is the standard at the wide receiver position. We saw it last year. But fantasy is all about balance. You want a guy who, yes, can be a point getter, but also on any given day, you can feel okay rotating in and out of the squad. You're going to have to, if you draft CeeDee Lamb, place him at a premium. If you're getting the bulk of what CeeDee Lamb does in terms of production from him, then how are you focusing on the rest of your fantasy team? CeeDee Lamb is a player, this is the point I'm trying to make. CeeDee Lamb is a player around whom teams revolve. If you're drafting a fantasy squad and you're someone who says, I want someone who's just a point getter, I want someone who is going to get the bulk of my points, then by all means draft CeeDee Lamb. But what I love about fantasy sports is you have to find the caution in things. You can't just go in and expect this guy to fall to you. Because CeeDee Lamb definitely is going to go very, very early in draft boards. And I think that people are going to have to be wary about that. Because as much as I love CeeDee Lamb, as much as I said that there are very few faults in his game, he definitely is someone who you're definitely going to have to pay very close attention to if you choose to roster him. Mainly due to the fact that CeeDee Lamb is such a special player who has such a special way of doing and excelling in what he does best, that I really don't think it's to your benefit to just go out there and get someone like him. Because by all means, he is going to score 20 to 25 fantasy points a game. But the grand scheme of things, do you want one guy who can do that, or two guys who can do that? Or two guys who can combine to give you as much production and as much balance, most importantly, than a guy like CeeDee Lamb? That question is up for your determining. I don't know what you guys think, but leave any ideas you have in the comments. But that should just about do for today's edition of the show. I hope you guys liked it. It was very player profile heavy. Tomorrow is going to be the case yet again. It should be a fantastic show tomorrow. But before I leave you guys, I do ask that you like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. Consider leaving a tip or donation if you do feel so inclined at the link gsmc.cloud. I've been Christopher Shepard. This has just been another episode of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We are going to be back with yet another exciting episode tomorrow. We will see you then.